Welcome back to the Only You here in studio, and of course, Dr. Patino in his office, having a little chat pre-show about all the good things happening in Dr. Patino's life. And one of the things, though, that continues to be a challenge for all of us out there is, of course, COVID-19, and in particular for our children. Some things in the news about vaccines for kids, and even just the behaviors inside of schools. And the thing that shocks me the most, at least, is when you have a disconnect between the child's understanding, knowledge, and behavior concerning COVID and that of the parents. What have you observed in your day to day practice concerning this subject, Doctor?
Well, let me tell you the good news first, and is that COVID seems to be decreasing in frequency and intensity all over the United States. So we're starting to probably move away from the pandemic into epidemic or endemic type of situation, which is actually a good thing. The bad news is that it's a mess. I mean, I don't know. I know it doesn't sound very professional, but the whole situation, not only with kids, but with guidance, is becoming quite contaminated, if you may, because people are being pulled in a lot of different directions. Let me just give you an example. Let me pick the state of California. You get the state of California saying our guidance is that we're moving into uh, an endemic or epidemic situation with COVID, moving away from pandemic guidelines, a whole series of guidance. But then you get cities like LA saying we're not ready for it, right?
Hmm.
So the problem is that people in LA also are citizens of the state of California, right? So who's telling them the guidance? And that is being kind of like the rule all through the pandemic, right? So when we take all of that into children, you get into a very politically hot area right now, which is schools, right? Because the major thing political right now is school boards, right?
Hmm.
And how parents want to take over, question quote unquote, the education of their kids. So anything that is coming from the authorities is perceived as either mandate or manipulation, right? They're trying to manipulate and taking away the control of my kids. And I understand the politics of that. I think we've been dealing with that for the last 2 or 3 years. What I don't understand is the lack of purpose, right? Because at the end of the day, sending your kids to school has a purpose, and the purpose is the education of your children, right? And the education of your children has to be a compromise between parents and school.
Hmm.
It's not an issue of control, it's an issue of what is the best information that kids can receive so they can grow up to be independent, productive, and content adults. And you have these groups of adults fighting with each other, everybody thinking that they know what they're doing, and the kid is perceiving that. And when you're dealing with kids and adolescents, the problem is that they don't understand you're empowering the kids,
Hmm.
right? You're
Interesting. Yeah.
empowering the kids to be in control. Because at the end of the day, what the kid's hearing is, I am the prize, right? So if I am the prize, then I have a lot more power than they think I do, right? So kids start also manipulating, right? And that
Hmm.
all of this is a consequence not only of COVID, but is kind of the result of um, politics on one hand and helicopter parenting on the other hand. That has been occurring for the last 10 years or more, right? So everybody thinks they know what they want. Nobody's talking to each other. Everybody's fighting with each other, and the kids are becoming more powerful. And that is not good for the behavioral health of children.
Yeah, they need guidance, they need guidelines, they need some authority figure, not to be overwhelming, but to that they can trust, they can look up to. It's interesting you said that about the power. I have known of some kids, uh, daughters and sons of the people I know, who have really taken advantage of the COVID thing. They have a little system that they get to use to play to get the things they want, whether it's homeschool, whether it's an extra special attention, or even just space in the classroom. They are actually taking advantage of it.
Yeah, and we have talked about this pre-COVID, and we're talking about it now post-COVID. or during COVID, the dynamics don't change very much, right? And when you have to think of the education of your kids, whether it's done in the family initially with school, with the extended family, grandparents. When the baby is born, it's like planting the seed for a tree, right? And the tree starts growing, and you feed that tree with guidance, with values, with recognition of assets and deficits that the kid brings with them, recognition of temperament. And when you put all these seeds together, right? So when the kid becomes an adolescent, they start growing their bigger the tree, right? And the branches of the tree will continue to grow in the right direction if you did the right thing, okay? In terms of feeding the values, the guidance, the boundaries, the good, the bad. And that's everybody working together, right? Nobody can really take total credit for how the kid or how the tree ends up growing, right?
It takes a village, right?
Exactly. But what happens once the kid goes into adolescence is that there's a lot of opportunity for some of those branches going in the wrong direction without you even knowing, right? So I always say that when you get to the adolescent stages of growth, which is where things become more intense, where the manipulation is more evident, where the anger becomes more evident, this is not the time to start feeding the tree again. It's a time of containment.
Mm.
Okay, to provide the tools necessary for those branches to not go in the wrong direction, right? So you have to trim here, you have to put some boundaries here, so those branches continue to grow in a healthy way. Because if one of those grows too far out or too heavy on some area, it can make the whole tree fall, right?
Mm.
So you see, if we use that analogy, what we're doing with fighting with each other as as the members of the village that is providing the values, the rules, the morals for the kid to get to adolescence and utilize those values. Okay, kids in adolescence, the purpose of adolescence is to become independent. So we need to understand that when the kids get to that area of growth, it's not about us anymore.
Mm.
It's not about us parents doing the right thing, right? It's about that tree growing in the right direction. And our job becomes one of containment. But what you're hearing, especially in board meetings, people are arguing. I mean, I'm sorry to say this, they're arguing stupidity, right? Because they're basically arguing who's right and who's wrong,
Mhm.
and who should be in charge of saying this or saying that. And that is actually, to a high degree, totally disrespectful to the intelligence of the kids, right? Because we're basically saying my kids are so fragile that they can't take it.
Mm.
They can hear this or they can't hear that. When in reality, in order for them to have options, as adults, they have to have different opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. As a teacher myself, or former teacher, I've heard, it amazes me when people say, oh, our teachers are teaching our children how to be leftists or communists or this or that. I can honestly say in the years I taught, we didn't sit there in the coffee room and try to figure out how we're going to manipulate your children. Our job was to provide them with the education and, like you said, really look at their development, and give them options and have them thinking. Not tell them what to think, but to think. And it's weird. I too feel a little insulted when I see these posts on social media, to say that these incredibly hardworking teachers, because it is really a thankless job. It is way more hours than most people think. Um, are plotting some weird, internal coup or corruption of the children that we're protecting and trying to help grow.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, my business, I have to deal with the boundaries of reality, right? I mean, my job is to decide if people are thinking within the confines of reality, or they're getting outside of reality. The problem is that when you get outside of reality with a purpose, right? Which the purpose is, I have to get my way because I'm always right. That's not only delusional, that's dangerously delusional because the consequences for those that you think you're protecting are pretty serious, right? I mean, I have to tell you, because I see these kids in the hospital, especially the vulnerable ones, all the time. And I talk to them about these things. What do you think about this school um, arguments and the boards and that they don't want to teach you this, they only want to teach you that? And the kids actually laugh and they say, my parents are really stupid, right? Now, they're not going
Interesting.
to tell that to their parents, but the problem is the kids are ashamed,
Oh,
right?
interesting.
And that is problematic because the kids. I mean, you're furthering the idea of the kids being embarrassed by you. So again,
It's a
I
big
have to
enough
raise.
problem at that age to begin with.
Well, they have enough problems worrying about people liking them,
Yeah.
than to be embarrassed by their parents' hate or their parents' irrationality or the parents' anger, right? They may play along because they can get whatever they want, but that doesn't mean they don't feel it, right? So I get back to the idea it's not about the parents. It's not about the parents being right and yelling and screaming in a board meeting. It's about the kids, right? It's about the kids, and people need to stop being afraid of their kids growing up to be independent adults because they will, one way or another, right? The question is how secure or insecure they're going to be. And the only way to be secure as an adult is to have a variety of options that you can exercise. When you are saying, my kid can only learn this, you're limiting the ability of your child, right, to have options. Because basically, not only you want to be in control of what your kids learning, you want to be in control of how they live as adults. And you want them to be an image of you.
Mm, interesting.
And and that is not fair to the kid, right? We don't raise kids to be an image of us. We raise kids to share our values. We raise kids to share our morals, but we also raise kids to do with those values and morals, okay? What they decide to do with their values and morals is not about us. It's about them, right? So it's very romantic to hear, uh, when you have a 7, 8, or 9-year old saying, I want to be like my dad. I don't hear a lot of adolescents saying that.
Interesting.
Or I want to see like my mom. But there will be because the morals and values that they were giving are the same. But we are raising kids to be their own person, not to be an extension of us.
So you say that they're actually very aware of these, kind of little immature tantrums that these adults around them are now having.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
Kids are a lot more aware of what's going on around them that we give them credit for, right? It's not like adolescence is a box of stupidity. These kids are pretty smart, but they're struggling to learn maturity, right? And
Hmm.
you don't learn maturity by seeing immature adults fighting with each other.
Interesting. You've said in the past that kids that tend to have an intellectual development, an advanced intellectual development, like a higher IQ, tend to have a lower EQ, the emotional. So in a way, this whole generation is like that because they have access to the internet. They understand that it's algorithm driven. They have some critical thinking skills that maybe their parents don't have. So is it kind of retarding that emotional development, you think?
Well, I think that it's complicated because it implies a multitude of factors. It implies genetics. I mean, usually when we talk about raising kids, we have this idea of a perfect family, right? And we have this idea of a child being born with a perfect temperament, and we have this idea that the kids being born with perfect genetics and no family history of anything. It's not like that. There's a whole set of things that happen even before you're born that are going to be determinants on your assets and deficits, right? Then you're going to have parenting. right? What I do see as a pattern because of expectations and values is that kids are not being expected to grow as fast, and they are a lot more protected now than they were before. And that's a process that I think, in my experience, has been developing since the end of the Vietnam War, right?
Mm.
And I think in part is because people didn't have to worry about the draft anymore. There was a time when you worry, you start in high school, you're 16, 17, and you're wondering, am I going to get drafted? I remember those times. I had to decide. I mean, fortunately for me, I didn't have to get drafted, but I went through the process of having to plan my life based on the possibility of being drafted. That is no longer the case. So the expectation of kids giving something back to society kind of disappear, right? I'm not making a judgment of being good or bad. I'm just explaining a process, right? So kids nowadays are not expected to give back anything.
Mm.
And that's been going on since the mid 1970s. So we ended up with kids who are don't see themselves as having to give, don't give themselves as needing to grow because you're going to go to Southeast Asia, right? And you don't know if you're coming back. So on the other hand, we also learn that development for the brain kind of matures around age 24 to 26, right? So there are things that are changing, right? Expectancy is also expanded. So kids are not in a rush, to be successful or to be adults. So people are not getting married as early as they used to. People are waiting longer to have children. And I'm talking about a first world society, right? That is very different if you go to the third world. But in general, we have to understand that the multifactorial issues. Now, temperament is inherited, right? So now we have a generation of parents that are very smart, as you said, right? They really think logically, sometimes too linear in the logic, but then they behave like 3-year-olds when things don't go their way. So you have adults behaving like children. You really wanna think about it, what you see in the board meetings, for example, people yelling and screaming, it's a child throwing a tantrum.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like it is had to be my way or no way, and I have this whole rationale for it, right? That's terribly immature because you're reflecting your fear of learning. You're reflecting your resistance to hear somebody else's argument because it may challenge yours, right? But that's how knowledge happens. We challenge each other's knowledge, and we look at the positive and negative of every opinion. Here is it's like automatic. I hate you. But you don't know me. How can you hate me?
Mm.
I actually believe that you have to love someone to really hate them, right? But because those are very passionate feelings. How can you have so passionate of a feeling toward me if you don't know me? And I have that discussion with kids because they will come and tell me, I hate you because you don't let me go out. Okay. You don't even know me. How can you be so passionate? Okay. And they're basically not really hating you. They're just reflecting their anger, hoping to intimidate. Right?
Mm.
If I get intimidated enough, I may change my mind, which I don't. Right? But I have to reply to their anger and frustration in very neutral ways so they can understand, because what happens is when somebody gets angry, like in a board meeting, that you can get the board members reacting with anger and frustration, and there's just a mirroring of fear, insecurity, and intimidation going back and forth.
Mm. Interesting.
Yeah.
I was telling you before the show, my wife's having an issue with her stepdaughter in that situation. She's trying to get out, and I said quite a few times to her, I said, you got to let her work it out herself. Be there to help out, be there to guide, but she's really got to do as much as she could. And my wife is fighting that helicopter parent or that swoop in and I'm going to fix it and take care of everything, mentality. She's fighting it very, very valiantly, but I think a lot
You
of
see
parents
one,
don't even try.
yeah, but you see what one of the situations that happens a lot more frequent now than it happened when you and I were teenagers, is that parents feel a need to explain, right?
Mm.
Like the kid has to understand my logic, you know, otherwise I'm not being effective. And again, it's not about you, right? It's about them. So when your mother or my mother was scolding me in the mid '60s as a child, '70s as a teenager, right? She wasn't trying to prove that she was right. She was trying to change my behavior for whatever means. Maybe some of them at times more aggressive than now. But now we bought into the idea that you have to be logical,
Mm.
right?
Interesting.
That you have to understand. You don't have to be logical. You just have to learn to not be angry, don't make a judgment, right? And extend a hand. But you have to do it with neutrality, right? I don't hear anybody in this dilemma of the board's issues, whether it's about masks or whether it's about materials that are being presented in school. No, I don't hear anybody extending a hand and say, well, how can I be of help? Right? It's all about everybody going to their sides, everybody taking legalistic approaches, everybody hoping that somebody's going to come and be right, right? And everybody's forgetting purpose. And the
Mm.
purpose is our kids. That's really our purpose.
My other job, I deal with a lot of different people from different walks of life, different political views, and I always find it interesting that as the person in charge, I have to be as neutral as I can, and I'm always trying to help them. And I had one person recently said, "Why are you doing this?" I said, "Because it's the right thing to do, and this is the job." They thought that I would like stop doing my job because I didn't line up with certain political belief systems or whatever that they had. And I found that very interesting that they would even expect me not to.
Yeah, I deal with those issues in with staff with my staff and other people, and I'm not known uh, for being a very I don't know. I don't want to say that I'm uncaring, but I'm very assertive in an empathic way, right? But we have raised a generation of people who feels entitled to be recognized for doing their job. I grew up with the idea that you get recognized for extraordinary achievements, right? But now people are offended if you don't recognize that they're doing their job, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
I totally get that.
so I mean, the kids actually feel entitled to want an explanation, right? And they feel entitled to being told that they're doing a great job. So sometimes people come to me and people that don't work for me and they say, well, you never praise us, right? No, I mean, you're doing your job. When you do something extraordinary, I'm going to praise you. I think you're doing a good job and you get paid for it.
Yeah, I mean
I mean, what?
that is the phrase, isn't it? It's the paycheck at the end of the day.
Yeah, but people look at me like if I'm an ogre or something, right?
Interesting.
And but that's I mean, we have raised a couple of generations with a lot of entitlement, lack of empathy, and inability to give back, right? And I'm not saying that's just everybody, right? But in general, there's a trending toward that.
Mm.
And I think that if we are to be successful at this, we need to go back to the idea that we need to not judge people. I listen to these board meetings often because I find it really entertaining and entertaining and irrational and sometimes delusional what people are talking about. But it's like people just want to be able to say whatever they want to say without purpose, right? I mean, it's never about how do we go about helping the kids learn better. Is I want to be in control while my kids learning, right? Um, I mean, I really encourage people to go and read the meaning of a university. What does the term means, right?
Hmm.
It means universal. It's a place where you go to learn everything. Okay, but right now it's at the boards and the middle schools and high schools. The next step It's going to be at the boards of universities, right? You cannot teach this to my kid, which is basically technically not, you're not in charge of the kid, right? But then we're going to start getting kids going to the boards at the universities saying you shouldn't be even thinking about teaching us that stuff right now. So that's, I mean, and then you're going to get people going to their places of employment and saying, I don't want to do this. This is against my principles, right? So you actually shrinking the ability of these kids to be mature adults
So
and
what is this?
to have their own minds.
So what is the solution? What can parents listening and people who watch this say? Okay, I think I see a little bit of what you're talking about. What are the steps that they can take to help change that?
I think that we need to get back to the idea of establishing dialogue. I think that we need to do like what we learned to do in medical malpractice lawsuits, where you have an impartial party be a mediator.
Interesting.
So you bring somebody in the middle, a third board of people that have no money in the fight, right? To say, okay, I'm listening to your side, I'm listening to this side. How can we come out with some ideas for this? Make it a process and not an event, right? Detach it from politics. And again, I don't have an issue with the perfection of an educational system. There's a lot of fault everywhere, right? But we're not looking for solutions. We're looking for wins, right? And not wins that are good for the kid. We're looking for political wins, right? We want to replace the board so we can do whatever we want. How is that good for the kid? So there needs to be some mediation between the schools and the parents and help them learn how to get together. I mean, the way I looked at it when I look at these board meetings, it's like a bad family therapy session, right? That everybody's talking about getting divorced, right? So let's bring some sanity to this and ask the right questions, What are you trying to accomplish? Where are we going with this? Is there a middle ground where we can find some balance on this, right? But as long as you're digging your heels in one extreme and the other side is digging their heels at the other extreme, there's no communication, there's no dialogue, right? So I think that there's room for improvement, but it's going to require a referee. Somebody's got to be the referee. You can't. I mean, this is a fight when it comes to the kids. That is a fight without a referee. So think about a boxing match without somebody in the middle, like saying, "Stop hitting below the belt," right?
Interesting. It's just like a brawl. It seems that the topic that we have, or the title here was kids and COVID-19. It seems that the COVID-19 was really kind of what allowed them to crack it open and start discussing all the other issues. And really, that's going to be the lasting effect. It's not so much their health. We're getting past that, as you said. Now it's going to be the behaviors and um, these parents trying to then take over and manipulate and control an educational system that they probably don't even understand.
Yeah, and again, and also an educational system that has become too far into doing policy for the exception and instead of doing policy for the rule. And I think that parents are a little tired of that. So we need to stop being afraid, both sides, right? We need to give the kids a little more respect for their intelligence and a little more restraint, you know, for their so their branches grow in the right direction. But doing this, I mean, what is happening with the educational system and the parents' fights is really empowering the kids to manipulate. They're just laughing behind your backs.
And it's funny you said that because I do deal with a lot of younger kids, and it's amazing how much they're laughing at their elders right now. That is absolutely the truth. And since we don't want that to continue, maybe think a little bit more when you speak into your child. Understand that our job now, especially during adolescence, is again is containment and help those branches grow. Don't make things a zero-sum game. Try not to stay emotional, and be good parents. Thank you very
Amen.
much, Doctor.
Hey, we'll see you next week. Thank you, man.
Take care.